Could somebody confirm if the presentation is visible on your side?
Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it is. Visible.
Oh, great. Okay, so we're going to be discussing the role of nutrition in wellness during our session this evening. And if you have any questions or comments, I invite you to just make use of the chat box. Just leave your comment or your question there, and we'll be able to address it at the end of our session. So as we begin, I would just like you to think, what are your expectations? Or just type in the chat box, what are your expectations as we go through our session this evening? When you heard that we'll be having a presentation on nutrition, what came through your mind? What are some of the elements that you hope we will address during our presentation this evening? I know all of us like stories, right? That inner child within us loves stories. So a story is told about a woodcutter, right? This woodcutter was out in the market looking for a job, right? So he, spent a lot of time applying for a job, sending around, word that, look, is there anybody out there who might be in need of somebody who is good at cutting down trees? So eventually he's hired by a man who deals in timber, right? And so he begins his work. It's a great job. It gives him good benefits. He has health insurance. He has lunch benefits, and he gets this very big brand new axe to allow him to chop the trees. So first day on the job, the woodcutter is very excited. Off he goes into the forest and he begins to cut down trees. So on the first day, he manages to cut down 30 trees, and he's very excited. His boss is very excited, and his boss says to him, hey, you are probably one of the best woodcutters we've had in this company. 30 trees is quite commendable. The woodcutter was very happy, he was very motivated. Next day he returns, he starts chopping down trees, and he only manages to chop down 29 trees. So he says, okay, 29 is not so bad. Maybe tomorrow I'll be able to cut down 30 like I did on the first day. On the third day, he cuts down 28 trees. And the trend continues, 27, 26, 25. With each day, the number of trees that this woodcutter is able to cut keeps going down and down and down and down, right? And he begins to get worried, right? When he gets down to 10 trees a day, his boss comes and has a talk with him and says, hey, what's going on? You were our star performer. You came in, you were doing great things, and the woodcutter thinks to himself, maybe I should get to work extra early. I should leave late. Let me see how many trees I can cut down. But the trend continues to go down until one day his boss says to him, hey, wait a minute. He asks him this crucial question. He says to him, when was the last time you sharpened your axe? Ha! The woodcutter stops and looks at him, and he says to him, no, I haven't sharpened my axe. I don't have time to sharpen my axe, you know. And then, of course, his boss explains to him that, you know what, the reason why the number of trees that you are able to cut is going down is because you haven't taken time to sharpen your axe, right? Why do I tell this story? I tell this story because sometimes we find ourselves caught up in the cares of this life. We find ourselves working, trying to make ends meet. If you're studying, you are trying to prepare for that exam, you're trying to do the assignment, you're trying to meet the deadline, you are, trying. But one thing we may tend to neglect is to sharpen the saw, sharpen the X. Now, who is the X? What is the X? You and I are the X, right? Our mental capabilities, our physical capabilities, right? We need to take time to sharpen the X, right? We need to take time to look after ourselves. We need to take time to do what is important for our health and our well-being. This brings me to a very important concept, a concept that I came across a few years ago, and this is the concept of being responsible, right? Being responsible is not being selfish, but being responsible is the act of being responsible to me for my health my happiness and my well-being, right? Ladies and gentlemen who are listening this evening, you cannot outsource a responsibility to look after your health, right? You cannot postpone looking after your health and your well-being. You cannot put it at some, distant date in the future. I shall make the right decisions tomorrow. The time to make the right decisions is today. And today I am simply inviting you to make the right decisions regarding what you eat, right? What you eat forms a very, very important part of your health and wellness. Now, diet is actually the number one contributor to disease. If you look at most diseases, they tend to have a dietary component, right? If there is one thing that all of us could do today to improve our health, to improve our well-being, we need to change the way we eat, right? Diet is a universal thing. In the work that I do, over and over, I see the impact that diet has over the health of different individuals. And many times I have never met, I hardly meet people who eat a very healthy diet who are ill. In most cases, most people I interact with are not eating the right way. I am not saying that if you eat well, you will not get sick, right? I'm by no means saying that, but I am simply saying that if you choose to make better choices today, you would definitely see the impact that it has on your health, right? There are so many diseases that are linked to diet, right? A simple Google search will give you quite a few. But number one, I believe you had a talk on cancer just a few days ago. A number of cancers are linked to diet, right? And we find that more and more the cancers that are linked to diet are on the rise worldwide, cancers of the breast, of the prostate, of the colon, of the stomach. These are quite high. Cancers that are linked to viruses or infections are on the decline, but we find that cancers that are linked to lifestyle factors seem to be on the rise globally. Diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune conditions, abdominal issues such as ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, diverticulosis, gallstones, all these have a dietary component. Stroke, heart disease, allergies, the list could go on and on. All these diseases are linked in a large part to the way that we eat. And what's interesting, I'll give an example of something like breast cancer. If you look at breast cancer risk factors, number one, they say is obesity, right? And obesity is clearly linked to the way that we eat. So obesity, or being obese or being overweight, will increase your risk for breast cancer by 50%, right? So in most instances, you'll find that diet plays a very big role in the development of most diseases. So diet is very important. Like I said, if you want to change anything, right, as far as your health and wellness is concerned, the first thing you need to look at is what you are putting in your stomach, right? These are statistics that I think 2016 world statistics, you find that, I think they must be from the WHO, which indicate the annual number of deaths by cause. And we see that number one, cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease, conditions of the heart and the blood vessels. Cardiovascular disease has a very strong dietary component in it. Then you look at cancers, right? So as you look at the top, I would say amongst the top 5, you find that most of those conditions are linked, if not all of them are linked to diet, right? So diet is very, very important as far as disease is concerned. Now, I will turn this to you, and I would like you to answer this question for yourself. Do you think you typically eat a healthy diet? What dictates your eating habits? Do you eat simply to get full? Do you eat simply to move on to the next task? Right? What informs your eating habits? Is it convenience? I know more and more nowadays, especially with the younger generation, we want to find that which is quick, that which is easy. We eat quickly and we move on to the next thing. Never mind whether that particular food is going to meet the nutritional requirements for your body. Remember, I said at the beginning, the body needs what it needs. right? Whether you give it or you don't give it, right? The body still needs that. So if you do not give the body what it needs, it's going to run on a deficit, and that is when disease begins to set in, right? Don't think that just because you are eating whatever you're eating, your body is just going to get on with it and move on. Some of our eating habits will catch up with us, sooner or later. Right. I told this story when I came to Nairobi a few weeks ago. I will tell it again. This gentleman you see on the screen is a man named Dennis Burkitt. Dr. Dennis Burkitt made an amazing discovery. He came to Uganda in 1946, and he lived here until 1964. He came as a medical missionary from the UK. And when he came here, he expected to find people who were very ill. He expected to find a very huge chronic disease burden. He expected to find people with diabetes, with cancer, with high blood pressure, with gallstones. But to his surprise, he didn't meet a lot of those conditions, right? He met different conditions. And he was quite surprised, right? And so when he dug deep, he went a little further, he discovered that the native Ugandans, this is what he called them, the Black Ugandans, at the time, he discovered that they were eating a very natural diet. They were eating, they grew their own food, and their food was literally coming from the garden to their plates. And then he discovered that, hey, these people are not falling ill simply because of the food that they are eating. And my question to you this evening is, what has changed, right? What has changed since Dr. Dennis Burkitt's day 60, 70 years ago? You will agree with me that our lifestyles have changed drastically from what they were in the 1940s. This is 2023, right? So much has changed, right? The way people live. But one of the biggest things that has changed is the way that we eat, right? What we consider food is so different from what was considered food about 60, 70, or 80 years ago, right? So how then do we define a healthy diet, right? What is a healthy diet? If you go online, you will see so many different diets. In my line of work, I meet people who are struggling to lose weight. And many times they will come and tell me, doctor, I tried the blood group diet. Doctor, I did the keto diet. Doctor, I tried the Bantam diet. I did paleo. I did this, they will tell me of so many different diets which they have done. And I feel like it's one of the most controversial areas that we have today. Diet is so, people's beliefs in what a healthy diet is are so diverse, right? But I want to simplify it for you today. I was reading somewhere online just this evening, and it says that over the years, we seem to have lost common sense as humanity. What was obvious about 60, 70 years ago is not so obvious to us anymore, right? The universal description of food and what was healthy, was so obvious back then. But right now, we can sit down and debate on what a healthy diet is, right? And what this writer was saying is, it's because we've lost our common sense, right? What was so obvious back then is not so obvious to us now, right? And that is a very big problem. Now, in defining what a healthy diet is, we go back to the body. The body tells us what it needs, right? What does the body need? The body needs fluid, it needs calories, it needs macronutrients, it needs micronutrients. There are some processes which happen in the body which must happen, and if they don't happen, disease will set in. So therefore, the body needs the different components, right, of different food groups for it to function, right? But if you are to be able to determine whether or not these are the right food groups and the right quantities, the decider is, is there disease or is there no disease, right? So a healthy diet is one that prevents disease. A healthy diet is the one that improves and maintains overall health. A healthy diet is one that leads to healing and not disease. So if we're going to investigate or run an experiment to figure out, hey, so what is healthy? We want to look at the people who live the longest. We want to look at the people who live disease free, right? But then we need to investigate what these people eat. And for me, one such example is my late grandmother. She passed away in December. This woman lived for a very long time. We don't know how old she was by the time she died, but she had grandchildren that had grandchildren. So in my life, my example of a healthy person is my grandmother. My grandmother lived for most of her life free of disease. She was active well into, her 90s, close to 100. She only became ill about a year or two before she fell sick because, of course, she is not immortal. She had to die, right? All of us are going to go in that direction, right? But when I look at her, I always say to myself, look, this is how I want to age. This photo was taken probably 5 years before she died. So this is a picture of a beautiful 90-something-year-old, close to 100-year-old woman who was walking, without support for all those years, very strong, digging in her garden. Now, what did this old woman eat? Right, this old woman ate food that was close to nature. She grew her food. Her food came from her garden to her plate. Her food had no chemicals, no hormones, no pesticides. Her her food was not contaminated by antibiotics and artificial flavors and colors and preservatives. When you walk into the supermarket these days, you will pick up a packet of something that looks pink or yellow or some bright color, and you wonder what plant could this have possibly come from, right? And it's been packed with all this color, it's been packed with all these flavors, it's been preserved so that it can sit on the shelf for so long. These are the foods that we are eating. My grandmother's food had no added sugar, no added salt, no added oil. Her food was unprocessed, unrefined, and many times it was uncooked. Of course, she would cook her maize or cook her other things, but many times she ate raw food, right? So if you want the food that leads to life, this is how we ought to eat. Our food should be as close to nature as possible, the way God designed it to be, the way God created to be. In humanity, in all our cleverness, right? We have managed to contaminate the very thing that gives us life. We've tried to make the food bigger. We've tried to make the food better. We've tried to make the food yield more. We've tried to preserve food, right? And many times we are just trying to make money, right? The incentive at the end of the day is profit. Those companies that are making food are not necessarily thinking about our health and our wellness at the end of the day. They are thinking of how can we make the most money, right? How can we make this food palatable? What can we add to it to make it tasty, to bring you back all the time so you can spend your money? That is the motive, right? Not to keep you and I healthy. So we need to be aware of this. We need to be conscious about this. Sometimes we are not conscious about it. We you know we move towards these things subconsciously, right? And they keep reeling us in, and we are not aware of what we are doing, right? If we move back to the Word of God, in Genesis, it tells us what God intended us to eat. It tells us that God created food for us from nature, right? Natural food. And this is the basis of Genesis 1:29 to 30, Genesis 2 verse 16, and Genesis 3 verse 18, right? These verses reiterate the same thing. Of course, our theologians might take it a bit deeper and try to distinguish herbs from fruits and this and that. But ultimately, right, God created the food that He wanted us to eat, and this food was natural. It was free from contamination. It came from an earth that was that God had blessed. But even after the entrance of sin in Genesis 3, verse 18, He still says to us, you will eat the plants of the field, right? And these were the fields that Adam and Eve were going to plow, right? They were going to plant. But nowadays, we buy from the supermarket, right? Our field has become the supermarket. We have absolutely no control over what goes into that food, right? So I'm painting a gloomy picture here, but I want us to return. How can we try as much as possible to eat the way that God intended for us to eat in such a way that we preserve our health and our wellness? Now, in front of you is a picture. It may not be a perfect picture, but I want you to borrow the principles that are embodied in this picture, right? So when we sit down to eat our meals, right, true to the fact that our food should really be from the garden to the plate, half of our plate has to be fruits or vegetables. I normally say in the morning, we can have the more calorie heavy fruits, right? In the afternoon, vegetables. In the evening, vegetables. So when you sit down to eat, half of your plate should be fruits or vegetables. This is what we call the healthy plate. 50% protein and 50% carbohydrates. Now, I must say this, that many of us, no matter how you die, whether you are a vegetarian, you're a meat eater, what I tend to realize with most people is this is how our plates look. Our plates have a disproportionately large amount of carbohydrates, right? And this, my friends, is not a healthy plate, right? Where you have all this, starch in one plate. Where I live here in Uganda, we are so blessed with so much food. So you find that in the same plate, there's matoke, yam, cassava, pumpkin, rice. And then you'll have a bit of sauce. And then the vegetables are right there in the corner somewhere at the back hiding, right? This is how most of us eat. In Nairobi, maybe in Kenya, maybe it's ugali and, potatoes or whatever it is. But we tend to have plates that are starch heavy, right? The ideal is your plate should only have 25% carbohydrates, 50% at breakfast can be fruits, at lunch should be vegetables, at dinner should be vegetables. If you want to prevent disease, this is how you ought to eat. So this is one of the first principles of healthy eating, right? So it's important, the portions, the different portions matter, right? 50% vegetables or fruits, 25% carbohydrates, 25% proteins. This is very important. Some of us, because we're vegetarians, we feel like we are exempt from this. We can eat whichever way we want, but you will still run into problems later on in life because you've got your portions all messed up, right? I keep saying this to people. I see a lot of individuals who are vegetarians who have diabetes, who are vegetarians who have high cholesterol, who are vegetarians and are overweight, right? It's because we disregard this principle of proportion of portions. Portions are very important, right? The proportions of the various foods. So guys, let's fall in love with the vegetables, right? Let's eat. And what's interesting, vegetables are the cheapest foods that you can find, right? They are the cheapest in any economy. Vegetables are usually the cheapest. I appreciate that in dry places, it may be harder to get vegetables consistently all the time, but you can look at options of dried vegetables, for example. But vegetables generally tend to be the cheapest source of food wherever you go, right? Let's talk about fruits a little bit. Fruits should be eaten in the morning. You should limit your fruits to 2 servings a day. If you are diabetic, you want to limit your fruit intake even further, right? And try to take fruits which have a lower glycemic index. So fruits which have lower sugar content. So if you're trying to lose weight or you're diabetic, I normally advise that you try and limit yourself to fruits like the berries, the passion fruits, the guavas, right? The kind of fruits which are not too sweet and are very high in fiber, right? So with fruits, let's try and enjoy different varieties. Try to enjoy fruits which are in season, right? This is very important. We move to the vegetables, like I mentioned. Vegetables are usually the cheapest source of food wherever you are. You can eat 3 to 5 servings or even more. You can eat as many vegetables as you like. Nothing will happen to you, honestly, right? Except if you have some kind of, intolerance to certain vegetables. But generally, many of us can eat vegetables. You can eat vegetables the whole day, right? And nothing negative will happen to you, right? So try and eat a wide variety of vegetables. This is where the healing comes from, right? Healing comes from fruits to a certain extent, but vegetables are that much more higher as on that scale of healing foods. That's why God said of every herb, right? Because he knew that the healing was found in our vegetables. And the more bitter the vegetable is, the more healing there is in that particular vegetable. And in this class, I will also throw in the herbs. I'll also throw in the plant-based spices, right? So your ginger, your garlic is technically a vegetable, your turmerics, your cinnamons, right? So these have such healing power, right? So you'll find that a lot of the herbal concoctions that people are making now for healing disease are based on the herbs, based on the vegetables, on leaves, on their powders, these or roots, plant roots, all of these. This is where a lot of healing power is found. So this to me is the most important class of foods that we can possibly eat. And then we come to carbohydrates. I don't hate carbohydrates. They're important. They're good for energy, but we need to limit, right? It's important to exercise moderation as far as carbohydrates are concerned, right? And our carbohydrates have to be limited to high fiber, starchy varieties, right? So anything that comes from the earth, like the root-based potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, the cassavas, or the squashes like pumpkin, or here we have matoke, right? These are the healthier kind of carbohydrates. The grains, if you're eating the grains, they cannot be white. The grains have to be whole. The brown rice, the millets, the quinoas, the oats, right? The maize when it's whole, right? These are the kind of foods that we should focus on. Anything white, anything processed is not a good idea. It causes your blood sugar to go up. It increases fat stores in your body, which leads to obesity, leads to diabetes, contributes to a number of different health conditions. So limit your carbohydrate intake. Processed carbohydrates are just the same like eating sugar, right? You might say, I don't eat sugar, but if you eat a lot of chapati, my friend, it's the same thing at the end of the day, right? Because that chapati straight into your body to sugar, right? And remember, a lot of disease conditions thrive where there is high sugar. Cancer is one such condition. Cancer cannot thrive where there is no sugar. And I believe this was mentioned in the presentation a few days ago. So carbohydrates important to limit to a quarter of your plate, right? But also eat the right type of carbohydrates. Eat the high fiber. Whatever carbohydrate you're eating has to be high in fiber. We come to protein. When we come to protein, number one, the best kind of proteins are plant-based. So your legumes, your nuts, and your seeds. Your legumes are beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas. Your nuts, peanuts, cashew nuts, almond nuts, pecan nuts, Brazilian nuts, macadamia nuts, seeds. We have pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, sesame seeds, all sorts of seeds. These are very high in protein. And then these are the best, like I said, the best, the cleanest type of protein you can eat. And then we have the meats, right? The meat, if you are going to eat meat, ensure that your meat is clean. It's coming from a clean source, right? It has not been contaminated by chemicals, by antibiotics, by hormones. Are we together? And then it has to be lean, right? Without the fat. It has to be organic, not GMO, right? Those are the kind of meats that you should eat. So when it comes to meats, the requirements are very stringent. If you're going to eat the meat, ensure that you are very, very sure of where it's coming from. And then you need to limit the protein to a quarter of your plate in general, right? What foods should we avoid? Let's avoid the sugary foods or the sweetened food, any sugar added to it, or any sweetening of any sort with unnatural sweeteners, the artificial sweeteners. Let's avoid eating too, very high intake of carbohydrates. let's avoid the processed carbohydrates. So processed carbohydrates, anything that looks white, like the white rice, white flour and its children, white pasta, right? All those are processed carbohydrates. And then dairy, limit your intake of milk especially, right? Because we cannot, as adult humans, digest the milk protein, right? If you think about it, we are the only mammal that drinks the milk of another mammal, right? And continue to do so when we are adults, right? That is very strange, not so? So we cannot digest, we lose our ability to digest casein, the protein in milk by the age of 6 or 7. And many health conditions, especially gut issues and allergic conditions, are linked to the intake of milk. And then refined oils, when you walk into the supermarket, you see the seed oils, right? Seed oils are not ideal for cooking. So sunflower, corn, cotton, whatever seed it is, seed oils naturally are unstable at high temperatures and they form cancer-forming substances. So they're highly inflammatory. So refined oils are not a good idea. I'll talk about which oils you can use for cooking safely. Processed meat is a huge no. Processed meat, sausage, those meats we put in sandwiches, right? These have a lot of very toxic chemicals that cause cancer. If you do eat your meat, decide you're eating your meat or your animal products, limit the animal products to 10% of your weekly intake. That is the maximum, right? And this material is freely available on Google. Just Google research papers, you will see all the stuff that I'm talking about, right? So animal products, the limit really is 10% of your weekly intake of animal products. Beyond that, you are now leaning to the side of disease. So basically, when it comes to healthy eating in general, there's what we call the 90-10 rule. 90-10 rule says 90% of the time, try to eat healthy, try to eat natural, healthy foods. 10% of the time, you may include the processed, take your kids out for ice cream or, enjoy the occasional, this and that, right? But you must maintain that balance. 90% of the time, you must eat healthily. 10% of the time, you may cheat a little bit, right? This is how you maintain the balance of health. If you are eating unhealthily 50% of the time and healthily 50% of the time, it means that the scale is biased towards the unhealthy side, right? So 90%, so 10% is really about 2 to 3 meals a week where you can exercise a bit of leeway, right? On the do nots, but then 90% of the time aim to eat healthily, right? I think I've spoken about refined carbohydrates already. They increase your blood sugar levels rapidly. They increase your insulin levels. They lead to insulin resistance, which then leads to weight gain, which leads to insulin is very inflammatory and then increases your risk for cancer, autoimmune conditions, and so on, right? So you want to limit these refined carbohydrates. And I believe that the world struggles more with refined carbs than with any other food group. That's why I'm focusing on it a bit more. How do you prepare your food? Most of the time, try to eat it raw. When it comes to cooking, steaming is a very healthy way of cooking. Try not to overcook, especially the vegetables. Grill your food where you can, but not char grill, right? Grill it in the oven until it's nicely cooked. Avoid artificial additives when you are cooking. So beware of the spices you are using. Ensure that they do not have any artificial additives. If you see any EWAT on your spices, it's an artificial additive, right? So use natural herbs and spices. You can find garlic powder, onion powder, rosemary, so many natural spices that make your food taste good. Limit your use of salt. If you have white salt in your house, I beg you to go and throw it away. It's been bleached. It has quite a lot of chlorine in it, which has no business in our bodies, right? Use organic salt, use Himalayan salt in small quantities, right? Throw out the white bleached salt. It's very damaging to your health. If you want to fry your food, occasionally use healthy, natural, unrefined oils like extra virgin oil, but you can't use extra virgin oil for high heat frying. It has to be for medium frying. You use coconut oil. You can use avocado oil. Occasionally, you can use ghee. Right, these are the better oils for cooking. Right, most of our refined oils, especially the seed oils, are harmful to our health. And then when it comes to cookware, use good cookware. Avoid the cheap aluminium cookware because aluminium leaches into the food you're eating. Aluminium has no business in your body. It's toxic. It's a heavy metal which is toxic to our nervous systems, to our to our neurons, right? So it causes a lot of problems in our bodies. So it's important to use, you can use clay like our grandmothers used to. You can use high grade stainless steel. You can use titanium. You can use cast iron. As long as the cast iron, you need to be careful that there's no rust and nothing, and no, you're storing it well such that it doesn't rust and get into your food, right? And then you can use good quality ceramic. You can use the glassware, the Pyrex that you use in the oven, right? All those are non-reactive and will not leach into your food. So mind what you are using to cook your food. Now you must be thinking to yourself, or some of you, hey, I've been eating in this very bad way. What am I to do, right? The first thing is focus on what you should eat and not what you shouldn't eat. I've mentioned a lot of do nots, but I've also mentioned a lot of things you should be eating, right? So I want you to focus on what you should be eating. And one of the things I have said, please eat a lot of, is vegetables. So I want you to just take that up, put that at the fore of your mind. Doctor said I must eat more vegetables. So focus on eating more vegetables, right? That's the first thing. When you begin to think of don'ts and don'ts, you get a mental block. And our tendency as human beings is to give up when we get to that point where we feel overwhelmed. You just give up. So focus on what I said you should eat. Go and eat. Put more vegetables in your plate, right? And then the second thing is to replace. Where you've been eating a lot of chapati, right? For example, put in replace that with sweet potato, replace that with regular potatoes, replace that with matoke, replace that with yam, replace. So what I'm trying to say is replace it with something healthy. Where you've been eating a lot of white rice, try and do brown rice in place of that, right? So replace. So look for replacements which are available to you. Look for replacements which are affordable to you, right? Very important. And then begin to eliminate, right? There's some things where you may not find a healthy replacement for, or some things you just need to throw out of your diet, right? For example, so start with the empty calories, things like sodas, for example. I find it very strange sometimes that when you are in a place where people purport to eat healthily, you will find that they will remove certain things, but the soda is always going to be there. And I find that very funny, right? Because soda is just about the worst thing that you can drink, right? So if you are into that soda drinking habit, you want to stop, right? Begin to eliminate. 1 day no soda, 2 days no soda, 3 days no soda. Okay, day 4 you might fail and drink. Fine, it's not the end of the world. Then you start over again, right? And you realize with time that you don't actually need soda in your life. And then experiment. Sometimes we eat poorly because we were raised eating poorly, or because we just cannot move out of our comfort zone. So it's important to experiment, try new things, right? Things that you said you would never eat. I remember when I moved to Uganda, I did not like eating matoke. I just could not understand the idea behind cooking a banana, right? But now I love my katoko. So I got out of my comfort zone and I began to eat matoke. Be creative, right? Think out of the box when it comes to cooking and eating. right? So think of, the kind of foods you can incorporate in your diet, right? If you are a parent, you have children, this is very, very useful because children can be very picky eaters. So try to be creative with them. Learn how to cook. Don't be at the mercy of other people. And this is usually where a lot of young people fall into this trap because they either don't know how to cook or don't want to cook, right? So you end up eating whatever you come across, and you are at the mercy of the person who has cooked that particular food. And then fortify. What does fortify mean? It means find foods which have a high nutritional value. Okay, I didn't include the superfoods here, but there are certain foods which are packed with nutrition, right? Foods like baobab, foods like moringa, foods like chia seeds. These foods are packed with nutrition. So try to find a way of incorporating such foods into your diet, right? And then this one of our final slides just talks about managing disease through diet. So a number of common conditions can be prevented, but also managed by ensuring that you are eating a healthy diet. So I think I'd already mentioned that if you are diabetic, you're obese, you're hypertensive, you want to limit your intake of carbohydrates, right? This is the biggest issue I find in people with these health conditions. Avoid inflammatory foods, the oils, right? The seed oils I mentioned before can be very inflammatory. Increase vegetable and protein intake to make up for the carbs that you've withdrawn, because you don't want to leave people hungry at the end of the day. So you compensate by increasing, especially the vegetables, limiting salt intake, taking healthy fats which are rich in omega-3, considering intermittent fasting, where you don't spend the whole day eating, but you restrict your eating into a number of hours during the day. Of course, supplementation. Sometimes we suffer from diseases because our bodies are crying out for nutrition. Remember, you've been eating badly for all these years. Your body is still yearning for that which is supposed to nourish it. So sometimes disease develops because we are deficient. And one of the vitamins I find a lot of us are deficient in is vitamin D. So sometimes supplementation is important, probiotics, but usually this approach is individualized. I thought I'll just, throw it there to show that we can actually manage disease through the food that we eat. So I've come to the end of our presentation this evening, but the question I'm going to leave you with is, what one step can you take today towards healthier eating? I would like you to revisit the way you eat. What did you eat for dinner, for example? How could you have made your dinner healthier, right? Or you can go back and think, what is my most pressing issue as far as eating is concerned? What am I doing very badly, and what one step will I take today to eat healthier? I do not invite you to take 5 steps or 3 steps, just one, and one at a time. You focus on that one step, you master it, and then you move on to the next. I think I've come to the end, but I will leave you with this. I think it's a very common saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? So I invite you to take that one step in the positive direction. Thank you so much. I will hand over back to our host.
Thank you so much. There are questions in the chat box.
All right, I'm trying to access the chat here. Someone was saying they need more than 25%. Okay, sorry, let me go to the beginning. How to prepare delicious vegetarian meals. And then vegan diet recipes or timetables in the East African market, and how feasible is it to eat healthily with a student's budget? Okay, so maybe the first few questions about how to prepare delicious vegetarian meals. I don't think it's very difficult to make the food. I don't know that the point here is delicious or the point here is variety. I think as we went through the presentation, we probably touched on many of those. Like if you're a vegetarian, what should you be focusing on? So and I know one of the biggest issues with vegetarian probably comes in when you look at the protein side of things. So if you look at the options you have, the beans, the peas, the lentils, the chickpeas, the soya, and soya can be done in different ways. You have quite a few options there. You've got the nuts that you can work with. You can make your own granola for breakfast with nuts and seeds, which are very high in protein. You can make your patties where you probably mix your patty, your soya with vegetables. You can put your garlic, your onion, and then you bake that, right? So there's so much that you can do in the way of preparing delicious vegetarian meals, right? So I invite you to sort of come up with a schedule, right? Okay, today I'm going to do, and when you're a vegetarian, it's important to be creative. It's very, very important to be creative, to try and make your meals very, very palatable, right? And there's so many resources available online. And here in Uganda, I belong to a vegan group where people are constantly sharing on how to make vegan cheese, for example, right? So there are groups you can join on WhatsApp where you can learn how to prepare some of these foods. So vegan diet recipes or timetables in an East African market. So I think it's the same question as that. You can go online, there are many resources. You can join groups where you can learn how to prepare some of these meals. How feasible is it to eat healthily with a student's budget? This is a very good question. Trying to remember 20 something years ago when I was a student, I don't think it was easy. But one of the things I've realized about healthy eating as I have grown older is sometimes the simplest way of eating is the healthiest. If I go back and I look at the way we would eat in the village and certain foods I just would not enjoy, those are the foods I'm looking for now. And those foods are not very expensive, right? I'm not sure what your situation is. Is it a situation whereby you have to go and buy food that has been prepared, or can you prepare your own food? But I feel like you can save a lot of money by preparing your own food. And certainly when I was at university, I found that when I prepared my own meals, it was way cheaper um, than trying to go and buy food that had been prepared. When you go and buy food that has been prepared by somebody else, not only is it more expensive, but also you don't have control over what they put in that food. So sometimes eating simply, I'll tell you, for example, what I had for dinner today. I had a mashed pumpkin with peanut butter, some beans, right? And cabbage on the side, right? And that is not a very expensive meal, right? So pumpkin, I mash it, I put peanut butter in it. So already it's so nutritious because it has peanut butter. And then there was beans on the side, and then there was cabbage on the side, right? So when you think simply, right, in your eating, you find that it becomes a lot cheaper, right, to plan your meals. You get sweet potatoes, you boil your sweet potatoes, you prepare your peas or your lentils or your beans, and then you find a vegetable, right? You buy cucumbers, you buy carrots, you chop them up, right? I believe it's a sustainable way of eating. But correct me if I'm wrong. But thinking simply is best. What is the best way to supplement first-class amino acid from a plant-based diet? and other macronutrients in light of health reform. So when it comes to amino acids, of course, it's hard to get. We know that for you to get all the essential amino acids from a vegetarian diet, it can be quite challenging, but there are generally some rules that you can follow. So, for example, if you mix a legume with a whole grain, and then you add some greens to that mix, that mixture will have all the amino acids that you need, right? I'll repeat that. If you put a legume like beans, and you put a whole grain like brown rice with greens like sukuma wiki, you have all your class of amino acids. So it's important that when you are eating your food, you try to include items from different groups. So what's great about things like whole grains also have protein. What's good about greens, the leafy greens, sukuma wiki, spinach, I'm not sure what else you guys have in Kenya. They also have protein, so they also have amino acids. Legumes have amino acids. So sometimes we look at amino acids as coming simply from foods that have been categorized as protein, and that is not correct. So foods that are like whole grains, whether it's your brown rice, whether it's your oatmeal, whether it's your quinoa, or whatever other whole grain you have access to, will also have some protein, right? And the proteins there will complement what you have in your legumes and what you can find in your vegetables, right? So it's a matter of putting the right combinations together, right? So that's how you can meet and get all your essential amino acids together. Supplementation of vitamins and minerals like cobalamin on a vegan diet, right? So on a vegan diet, I'm not sure what other vitamins you would miss again, apart from B12, as you've mentioned. But I've heard people argue that many times we think that B12 only comes from plant sources, but how do animals like cows also get their B12, right? They get it from plants. And it's been argued that when you eat raw food that is coming from the earth, you can also get your B12, right? But if you are not certain that you are getting enough B12, then you can always supplement. There's no harm in taking a B12 supplement. I certainly see a lot of vegans, and most of them will just proactively take a B12 supplementation just as precaution. But you can get B12 from your plant-based foods, especially your root-based foods that come from the ground. How do you make dietary changes for autistic children, given they have a liking of starchy foods and hence tend to be overweight? So I don't have a lot of experience with autistic children, but if I were to share experiences from some of the parents that I have interacted with, and certainly books I've read on children who have autism or ADHD, so your kids who are not neurotypical. One of the foods that tends to agitate, okay, not just one, but two groups, it's not so much the starchy foods. You can give them the starchy foods, but the healthy starchy foods, right? Your root-based, your whole grains, etc. But these kids tend to have an issue with gluten. Not all of them, but some of them. So maybe limiting the amount of wheat they are taking is one, and certainly the amount of sugar, right? Sugar tends to stimulate them. Sugar tends to have irritate their nerves. So if I were to rule out two, maybe a third one would be dairy, but most autistic kids do better on a gluten-free diet. That's one. Number two, do well on a sugar-free diet, and some do well on a dairy-free diet, right? So if you can make those changes for them, right? How would you do this? You can give them, I think a lot of the wheat comes into play at breakfast, where we tend to depend so much on bread, but there are other options you can think of. You can give them oatmeal at breakfast, instead of bread and anything that contains wheat. You can come up with porridge options like millet. You can come up with options like pumpkin porridge. You can make pancakes for them with alternative flours like amaranth or cassava flour, right? So there are things you can make for them that do not include wheat. So those are the major changes. And then try to limit their sugar intake. And try not to add any sugar to their food, right? And try to give them as natural food as possible. So even if you're going to give them eggs, for example, try and buy the organic local eggs, as opposed to the conventionally raised eggs, right? So those are some of the changes you can make for a child who is autistic. Then what about people working at construction sites or in the farm? Don't they need more than 25%? You're right, they may need 25%. But this presentation is for most of us who don't work on construction sites and farms. Your average person now has a sedentary job, right? Or a sedentary lifestyle. You're a student, you're in class, you have an office job. For the guy usually what's funny is when I speak to my patients, and I always use the example of the construction site guy. I always tell my patient, hey, you are eating like somebody who's working on a construction site, but you're not, right? So the guy on the construction site, as long as he's working on the construction site, he can burn those carbs, right? He doesn't have a problem. But you and I, who do not work on the construction site, we are probably getting far more carbs than we need because of our sedentary lifestyle. So for you and I who are sedentary, 25% is more than adequate. For the guy who works on construction or in a farm or on the road, people who are doing manual labor, definitely they may need a little bit more, and they compensate for it. They will burn it, right? But your average person nowadays has a sedentary job, right? And that's what it is. How do you eliminate gas from plant-based proteins? How do you eliminate? Okay, there are a number of ways of eliminating gas from plant-based proteins. The first way is to soak. That's number one. Second way is if you can cook in a pressure cooker, that would be great. The third way is to sprout. If it's something you can sprout, it eliminates the gas. If you can ferment it, it also eliminates the gas, right? So number one, soak. So if you're going to have your beans, soak them, it will release the gas. Pressure cook them, it will release more gas. If you can sprout, if you don't mind eating sprouted beans, they're certainly quite healthy. You can sprout or you can ferment. If it's something that is fermentable, you can ferment and it helps to eliminate the gas. Is it true that the darker the legumes or cereals, the more nutritious? Well, certainly, most foods that have darker colors, darker pigmentation, I think it denotes, maybe the presence of lycopenes or more phytonutrients. So yes, it depends on the class of food that you are looking at. The darker, but you mentioned darker legumes. With legumes, I'm not so sure. With cereals, I'm not sure which ones the darker cereals are that you're referring to. But definitely when it comes to, when you look at more the vegetables, your darker leafy greens tend to contain more nutrients. But if you could shed light on the cereals, like which ones are the darker cereals? What is the effect of refrigeration and microwave on food? Well, certainly if you cook something, it's always best that you eat your food, soon after cooking. If you refrigerate it, it will lose, nutrition. So the longer the food stays, the less nutrients it will have. And then on the microwave is a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very controversial area. But the papers I've read, some will say that also it reduces the nutritional value of the food. But there's also that worry that the actual, microwaves are, radioactive and may actually change the nature of the food, making it harmful. But that one is not clear, and I'm not sure if it's not clear because there are people who are trying to protect their interests, but the research doesn't seem to be clear cut. But there may be indications that microwaving food exposes it to radiation, which, makes it harmful to you. But certainly when you refrigerate something, it will lose, like food will have, the nutrients in food have like a half-life, right? So if you ate it now when it's fresh, it's going to have more nutrients. If you're going to keep it in the fridge and eat it later on, then definitely the amount of nutrients would have gone down. But it also depends on the kind of food. There's some foods which don't have a lot of good nutrition to begin with, right? Those ones may not be impacted by refrigeration. But if you're looking at a highly nutritious food, certainly the longer it stays in the fridge, the more nutrients it's going to lose. Give few examples of vegetarian probiotics. Vegetarian probiotics. So you said vegetarian, not necessarily vegan, right? So yogurt is considered vegetarian, not so. It's probiotic. Whichever food you ferment slightly will have some probiotics in it. So this side we tend to ferment the millet. We call it bushera. So once we ferment that, it will have some probiotics. If you have your kombucha tea, which is made from green tea, you ferment the green tea, it will have probiotics. You ferment your cabbage to make sauerkraut, right? That is also probiotic. I think I've given you quite a few examples there. So any fermented food, so whatever food is fermented, it will have some probiotics in it. And I think we're on the last question now. Is fasting a good idea for one's health? Fasting is a very, very good idea for one's health. You can fast. There are different ways of fasting. You can fast intermittently, right? In the way that you eat on a day-to-day basis. You make sure that you have a good 16 hours where you've not eaten in a day, and you limit your eating in an 8-hour window. This has been shown to be protective for a number of disease conditions, certainly good for weight, good for diabetes. That is actually that's the method, my preferred method for managing diabetes is actually intermittent fasting. So it's very good. And there's a lot of research that backs it up, right? It's freely available online. But then also fasting, like 24-hour fast, 48-hour fast, 72-hour fast. So many amazing things happen in your body when you fast, right? I'll talk about one of them, which intrigues me the most. It's something called autophagy. Autophagy. Auto is self, phagy, eating. So when you fast and you get to sort of the 24-hour mark of fasting, your body begins, there are structures in your cells called lysosomes, right? And these lysosomes begin to eat certain parts of your cells that have been damaged, right? And it eats these up, and these parts are repurposed to make other new structures in your cells, right? And this is how cancer is prevented, right? And the research surrounding autophagy is so exciting, right? So this is what happens when you fast, right? So I think that when you look at like even in Christianity, right, and you look at fasting, right, we always look at the spiritual benefits of it, right? But when I discovered that, hey, yes, there are spiritual benefits, but there are also health benefits surrounding fasting, I actually said to myself, hey, this is very exciting. As Adventists, I know we have seasons of prayer and fasting, but we don't have like a lot of structured fasting. I wish we did, right? Because it's so good for us, good for our health, it's good for our spirits. You find that, the Catholics will have the 40 days, during Lent, the Muslims will have Ramadan, most major religions will have a period of fasting. I'm not saying we should go and join those religions. No, my point is, even as us Adventists, I wish we had that, structured fasting. It's not only for spiritual reasons, but even for health reasons, right? And it's important for just resetting our bodies. So, in a nutshell, fasting is brilliant for our health. It's amazing for our health. But obviously, I wouldn't just encourage everyone to fast. There are some people who genuinely cannot fast, right? And I've met those people who just cannot fast. They begin to shake. They have all these terrible effects. So if you can fast, please fast. It's a very good thing to do. Weekly fast. Come up with a system where you fast regularly if you can. If you can fast as a way of lifestyle, intermittent fasting, that's also very good. Then there's another question which was put here: chia and ripe banana in a cup water, leave overnight, a vegan prebiotic. Okay, very good. So and also, I guess, for those of us who understand the difference between prebiotic and probiotic, so prebiotic is what the probiotics need to feed on, right? And then probiotic is the actual bacteria or fungi itself, right? So this is a good vegan prebiotic. And there are also other foods which are high in, like baobab, and baobab, I think, is very common in Kenya. It's a very good prebiotic. So it's good. It feeds your gut bacteria, right? So it's a very good. It enhances the growth of your probiotics in your gut. I think I've answered all the questions, and I'm looking at the time. I will hand over to our moderator, maybe to close up the meeting.
Thank you so much for the wonderful session. I believe we have all learned a thing or two. Thank you all for joining. Allow me welcome Gideon to pray with us as we finish the session.
Yes, I believe and pray. And Heavenly Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for what we've learned. Pray that you may enable us to put this into practice, and above all, enable us to study more and to make it better in our daily lives and in our health, that the Almighty may glorify you and uplift you in Jesus' name we can believe. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Feel free to leave.